February 13th, 2017, two best friends, one hiking trail, and 43 seconds of video that would haunt a nation for 5 years. At 2:07 p.m., 14-year-old Libby German posted a photo to Snapchat. She and her best friend Abigail Williams were crossing an abandoned railroad bridge in rural Indiana. It was a beautiful afternoon. They were laughing, taking pictures, enjoying a day off from school. 17 minutes later, Libby's phone captured something else, a grainy figure walking toward them on the bridge. And then, audio. 4 words that would become the most analyzed evidence in modern true crime history. Guys, down the hill. By sunset, both girls were missing. By the next afternoon, they were dead. And the man in that video? He vanished into the small town of Delphi, Indiana, where he'd been hiding in plain sight the entire time. This is the story of how a 14-year-old girl filmed her own killer, and why it took 5 years to find him. This is one of the most haunting cases in American crime history. The Delphi murders captivated the nation, not just because of the tragedy, but because of what Libby German managed to do in her final moments. She gave investigators everything they needed: a face, a voice, a location. And yet, for 5 long years, her killer walked free. Today, we're examining every detail of this case. From that February afternoon in 2017, to the shocking arrest in 2022, to the trial that's coming in 2026. This is Forensic Disconnect. And this is the complete investigation into the Delphi murders. Before we begin, if you're interested in deep dive investigations like this one, make sure to subscribe to Forensic Disconnect and hit that notification bell. We cover the cases that deserve to be remembered, with a focus on evidence, forensic analysis, and the human stories behind the headlines. New investigations every week. Now, let's go back to February 13th, 2017. Delphi, Indiana is the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. Population just under 3,000. The kind of small town where kids ride bikes to the gas station, where Friday night football games bring out the whole community, where people leave their doors unlocked. It's quiet, safe, the kind of place where parents don't worry when their kids go hiking. Abigail Joyce Williams was 13 years old in February 2017. Everyone called her Abby. She had long dark hair, a bright smile, and according to her family, she was funny, creative, and fiercely loyal to the people she loved. She played softball. She loved art. She was in 8th grade at Delphi Community Middle School. Liberty Rose Lynn German was 14. Everyone called her Libby. She was Abby's best friend, the kind of friendship that had lasted since elementary school. Libby was outgoing, confident, the kind of person who made friends easily. She loved photography, softball, and spending time outdoors. Her family described her as fearless. Abby and Libby were inseparable. They did everything together: sleepovers, sports, school projects. They had that rare kind of friendship where they could talk about anything, where they understood each other without needing to explain. On Monday, February 13th, 2017, the girls had the day off from school. It was a teacher planning day, one of those random weekdays when kids suddenly have free time. Libby's older sister Kelsey dropped them off at the Monon High Bridge trail just after 1 p.m. The Monon High Bridge is an old railroad bridge that's become a local landmark. It's about 60 feet high, crosses Deer Creek, and offers beautiful views of the surrounding forest. The bridge is part of a hiking trail that's popular with locals, especially on nice days. It's peaceful, scenic, the kind of place where you go to clear your head. But here's the thing about the Monon High Bridge. It's not exactly safe. The railroad ties are old, some are missing, and there are gaps where you can see straight down to the creek below. Walking across it requires careful steps, attention, balance. It's not recommended, but kids do it anyway. It's become a rite of passage in Delphi. Libby and Abby had been there before. They knew the trail, knew the bridge, knew to be careful. This wasn't their first time hiking there. Kelsey dropped them off around 1:35 p.m. The plan was simple: hike the trail, cross the bridge if they wanted to, take some photos, and be back by 3:11 p.m. when Kelsey's boyfriend would pick them up from the same spot. It was a beautiful day. Unseasonably warm for February in Indiana, temperatures in the mid-40s. The sun was out, perfect hiking weather. Libby had her phone with her. She was active on social media, loved taking photos, always documenting her adventures. At 2:07 p.m., she posted a photo to Snapchat. It showed Abby walking across the Monon High Bridge, arms slightly out for balance, the forest stretching out below them. It was the last photo anyone would see of either girl alive. The Monon High Bridge is approximately 850 feet long. That's almost 3 football fields. It crosses Deer Creek at a height of about 63 feet. The bridge was built in 1891, over 125 years old at the time of these events. It's made of steel and wood with gaps between the railroad ties that let you see straight down to the water below. Walking across it isn't easy. The ties are spaced irregularly. Some are rotted, some are missing entirely. You have to watch every step. Look down constantly, make sure you're planting your foot on solid wood and not empty air. There's no railing, nothing to hold on to. Just open space on either side and a very long drop if you fall. Most people who cross the bridge describe it as nerve-wracking, even experienced hikers. You feel exposed up there. The wind hits you differently at that height. Every step feels precarious. But kids in Delphi cross it all the time. It's become a challenge, a dare, something you do to prove you're brave. Take a photo on the bridge, post it to social media, show everyone you made it across. That's what Libby and Abby were doing that afternoon. The Snapchat photo Libby posted at 2:07 p.m. shows Abby about halfway across the bridge, looking confident, smiling. Just two friends having an adventure on a Monday afternoon off from school. After posting that photo, Libby kept her phone out. She was taking more pictures, probably filming video, capturing the views. The forest was beautiful that day. The creek below them, the blue sky above, and that's when they saw him. A man, walking onto the bridge behind them, coming from the direction they'd just come from, walking toward them. Now here's something important to understand about the Monon High Bridge. Once you're on it, you're committed. There's nowhere to go. No way to step aside. The bridge is only wide enough for single-file walking. If someone is behind you, and you're in front of them, you either have to keep going forward until you reach the end, or turn around and pass them going the opposite direction. Libby and Abby were maybe 3/4 of the way across when they noticed this man. They were closer to the far side than to the side they'd started from. The natural thing to do would be to keep going forward, get off the bridge on the far side, and let the man continue his own walk. But something made Libby uncomfortable. Maybe it was the way he was walking. Maybe it was the fact that he was alone. Maybe it was just instinct, that feeling teenage girls are taught to listen to when something doesn't feel right. Whatever it was, Libby did something extraordinary. She turned her phone around and started recording video. The video she captured is only a few seconds long. It's grainy, shaky, clearly filmed by someone who was trying not to make it obvious they were filming. But it shows a figure walking toward them on the bridge. The man is wearing blue jeans and a dark jacket. He has his hands in his pockets. He's wearing a hat, possibly a baseball cap or a newsboy cap. He has something bulky under his jacket on his right side. His head is down slightly, like he's watching his steps on the railroad ties, but he's definitely moving toward them with purpose. The video is brief, just a few seconds, but it's clear. This is a man, an adult male, walking across the Monon High Bridge in the early afternoon of February 13th, 2017. And then, Libby's phone captured audio. A male voice, gravelly, firm, commanding. 2 words first, guys, a pause, then 2 more words, down the hill. 4 words spoken in a tone that wasn't asking. It was ordering, directing, commanding 2 teenage girls to go somewhere with him. Libby kept recording for a total of 43 seconds. We don't know everything that audio captured because police have never released the full recording. What we know is that at some point during those 43 seconds, this man said, "Guys, down the hill," and Libby's phone kept recording. At 2:32 p.m., Libby's phone stopped moving. It stopped transmitting data. Whatever happened next happened away from cell towers, away from help, away from anyone who could have stopped it. The girls never made it to their 3:11 p.m. pickup. At 3:11 p.m., Derek German, Libby's grandfather, arrived at the trail entrance to pick up the girls. His car idled in the parking area. He waited. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15. No Abby, no Libby. He called Libby's phone. It went straight to voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. He texted. No response. By 3:30 p.m., Derek was worried. Libby was responsible. She always answered her phone. If she was running late, she'd text. This wasn't like her. He got out of his car and started walking the trail, calling their names. Nothing. He called other family members. Libby's older sister, Kelsey, rushed to the trail. So did Becky Patty, Libby's grandmother. More family members arrived. They spread out, searching different parts of the trail system, shouting the girls' names into the woods. Still nothing. At 5:30 p.m., the family called the Delphi Police Department. 2 13- and 14-year-old girls, missing since mid-afternoon, not answering phones, never made it to their scheduled pickup. This wasn't a case of kids losing track of time. Something was wrong. The police response was immediate. Officers arrived at the trail within minutes. They began their own search, bringing flashlights as the sun started to set. The temperature was dropping. It would be in the 30s by nightfall. By 6 p.m., more than a dozen officers were searching. By 7 p.m., that number had doubled. Volunteers from the community started arriving. Everyone in Delphi knows everyone. These weren't just two missing girls. They were someone's daughter, someone's granddaughter, someone's classmate, someone's teammate. The search continued through the night. Flashlights swept through the woods. K-9 units arrived. Search and rescue teams combed the trail system. People were checking under bridges near the creek, in the thick brush off the main paths. Libby's phone was still going straight to voicemail. No activity on social media, no texts, nothing. The family was terrified. Where could they be? Did they get lost? Injured? Were they hypothermic somewhere? Unable to call for help? Had they wandered too far into the woods and couldn't find their way back in the dark? Or was it something worse? By midnight, more than 100 people were searching. Police, firefighters, volunteers, family members. Everyone who could hold a flashlight was out there. The woods were full of voices calling, "Abby, Libby," over and over, hoping for a response that never came. As the night wore on, the temperature dropped into the 20s. Frost formed on the ground. The search continued, but hope was fading. Two teenage girls, somewhere in those woods, in freezing temperatures, with no phone contact, for more than 12 hours. At dawn on February 14th, Valentine's Day, the search resumed with even more intensity. Now there were hundreds of volunteers. The Indiana State Police had taken over the investigation. FBI agents were arriving from Indianapolis. News helicopters circled overhead. The media had picked up the story. Missing teenagers, small-town Indiana, a massive search operation. It was all over local news, spreading to regional coverage, starting to trend on social media. Everyone wanted the same thing, to find Abby and Libby safe. Just after noon on February 14th, approximately 24 hours after the girls were last seen alive, a volunteer searcher made a discovery. About half a mile from the Monon High Bridge, on the far side of Deer Creek, in a wooded area that's not easy to access, the searcher found something that made them immediately call for police. Two bodies, female, young, lying in the woods. It was Abby Williams and Libby German. Both girls were dead. The area where Abby and Libby were found is difficult to reach. It's across Deer Creek from the Monon High Bridge, down an embankment, in thick woods that aren't part of the main trail system. You wouldn't end up there by accident. You'd have to deliberately go there, climb down, cross through difficult terrain. Police immediately secured the scene. The FBI sent evidence response teams. The Indiana State Police Crime Scene Investigation Unit arrived. By mid-afternoon on February 14th, the woods around the discovery site were filled with investigators, forensic specialists, and law enforcement from multiple agencies. What they found at that scene would become the foundation of one of the most complex murder investigations in Indiana history. Very few details about the crime scene have been officially released. What we know comes from court documents, search warrants, and limited statements from investigators. And what we know is disturbing. Both girls had been killed. The exact cause of death has never been publicly confirmed, but investigators have said the deaths were homicides, that there was evidence of violence, and that the scene suggested the killer had taken time with what he did. There were what law enforcement called unusual elements at the crime scene, specific details that indicated this wasn't a random act of violence, that the killer had staged aspects of the scene, that there were signatures unique to this crime. Investigators found Libby's phone near the bodies. It was this phone that contained the video and audio that would become the centerpiece of the investigation. The 43 seconds of recording, the grainy video of Bridge Guy, the audio of Guys Down the Hill. The phone also contained other data, location information, timestamp metadata, potentially other videos or photos that have never been made public. Whatever was on that phone, police have guarded it carefully, releasing only the brief clip of video and the short audio excerpt. Here's what investigators were able to piece together about the timeline. At approximately 2:13 p.m. on February 13th, the man in the video encountered Abby and Libby on or near the Monon High Bridge. At 2:32 p.m., Libby's phone stopped transmitting data, suggesting they had moved away from the bridge area into a location with no cell service, or that something had happened to the phone. At some point between 2:32 p.m. and sunset that evening, both girls were killed. Their bodies were positioned in a specific way. The scene was staged. There were elements that suggested the killer had spent time there, that this wasn't a crime of panic or impulse. The killer then left the scene and disappeared into the woods, or back toward the trail system, or toward a road that's accessible from that area. Despite hundreds of searchers combing those woods that night and the next day, no one saw anything suspicious. No one reported a man covered in blood acting strangely, fleeing the area. He vanished. Forensic teams spent days at the crime scene. They collected DNA evidence, fiber evidence, trace evidence. They took soil samples, plant samples, photographs from every angle. They documented the exact position of the bodies, the surrounding vegetation, the path the killer likely took to get there and leave. They found a piece of physical evidence that would later become crucial: a knife sheath. It was near one of the bodies, potentially dropped or left behind by the killer. On that knife sheath, forensic analysts found DNA, a single source, male, not matching anyone in the National CODIS database. This meant the killer had no prior felony convictions that required DNA submission. He wasn't in the system. This DNA was their best chance at identification, but it only worked if they had a suspect to compare it to. The crime scene also revealed something that would become controversial later: markings or arrangements that some people interpreted as having ritualistic significance, sticks arranged in certain patterns, specific positioning of the bodies, elements that didn't make sense in the context of a random attack. This detail would become important years later, when the defense team for the accused killer would claim the murders were committed by members of an Odin cult, not by their client. But in February 2017, investigators were just trying to understand what they were looking at. The autopsies were performed on February 15th. The results were sealed. Cause of death, not released. Manner of death, homicide, confirmed. Specific injuries, not released. Time of death, estimated to be within hours of the girls going missing, likely the afternoon or early evening of February 13th. The families were notified. The community was devastated. Two 13- and 14-year-old girls murdered on a hiking trail in broad daylight in a town where violent crime was almost non-existent. And the killer was out there somewhere, possibly still in Delphi, possibly watching the news coverage, possibly living a completely normal life while police searched for him. The question everyone was asking: who is Bridge Guy? On February 15, 2017, 2 days after the girls went missing, Indiana State Police Superintendent Doug Carter held a press conference. The room was packed with media, family members, and community members desperate for information. Carter's announcement shocked everyone. Police had video and audio of a suspect, recorded by one of the victims. He played the audio first. "Guys, down the hill." 4 words in a male voice, gravelly and firm. The room went silent. Everyone was hearing the voice of a killer, recorded by a teenage girl in her final moments. Then Carter showed the video. A few seconds of shaky footage showing a figure walking across the Monon High Bridge. A man in blue jeans, a dark jacket, hands in pockets, moving toward the camera with purpose. "This is the suspect," Carter said. "We believe he was on the trail that day. We believe he's responsible for these murders, and we need the public's help identifying him." The response was immediate. The video and audio went viral. News outlets across the country picked it up. True crime communities began analyzing every frame, every syllable. Amateur sleuths started enhancing the video, isolating the audio, trying to extract every possible detail. The man in the video was nicknamed Bridge Guy by the media and the public. He became one of the most recognizable unidentified suspects in modern crime. Everyone had seen the video, everyone had heard the audio, but no one could definitively say who he was. Let's talk about what we can see in that video. Bridge Guy is wearing blue jeans that appear to be too big for him, bunched up at the ankles. He's wearing a dark jacket, possibly blue or black, that looks bulky. Under the jacket on his right side, there appears to be something creating a protrusion, like he's carrying something in his pocket or tucked into his waistband. Some analysts think it could be a gun, others think it's a fanny pack or a pouch. The bulge is noticeable. He's wearing a hat, possibly a flat cap or newsboy-style cap, dark-colored. His head is slightly down like he's watching his steps on the railroad ties, but you can see he's moving deliberately forward. His hands are in his pockets. His gait is steady but cautious, appropriate for someone walking across an old railroad bridge with gaps between the ties. That's what we can see. What we can't see is his face. The video quality is too poor, the distance too great, the angle too imperfect. We see a figure, a body type, clothing, but facial features? Impossible to make out definitively. Multiple forensic video analysts have tried to enhance the footage. They've used every available technology to sharpen the image, isolate details, extract more information. Some claim they can see a goatee, others see a younger face, or an older face. Some see a heavy-set man, others see someone thinner. The enhancements have created almost as much confusion as clarity. The audio has been equally controversial. Guys, down the hill. 4 words. But how old is the speaker? Some audio analysts say the voice sounds like a man in his 40s or 50s. Others say younger, maybe 30s. Some detect a regional accent, possibly from Indiana or a neighboring state. Others say the accent is neutral American English. There's debate about the tone too. Is it aggressive? Commanding? Some people hear anger in that voice. Others hear calm control, like someone who's used to giving orders and having them followed. Police released one more piece of audio information years later. The full sentence may have been longer. Guys might have been preceded by other words. Down the hill might have been followed by more commands. But police have never released the full audio clip, saying it contains details they need to protect for prosecution purposes. What's clear is that this audio was recorded as Bridge Guy was directing the girls off the bridge and toward the location where they'd be killed. This wasn't a friendly interaction. This was someone taking control of 2 teenage girls and forcing them to go somewhere they didn't want to go. And Libby German, in what would be her final act of bravery, made sure it was all recorded. Within days of releasing the video and audio, police started receiving tips, hundreds at first, then thousands. The tip line was overwhelmed. Every man in Delphi who vaguely resembled Bridge Guy became a subject of suspicion. People were reporting their neighbors, their co-workers, their relatives. The Indiana State Police set up a dedicated tip line. They created an email address. They assigned dozens of investigators to do nothing but follow up on tips. In the first month alone, they received more than 15,000 tips. By the end of the first year, that number had grown to over 30,000. Every single tip had to be investigated, cross-referenced, ruled in or ruled out. Some tips were promising. They led to interviews, investigations, searches. Some tips were clearly false, people reporting others out of spite or paranoia. Some tips were well-intentioned but wrong, people seeing Bridge Guy in every middle-aged man they encountered. The problem was this: Bridge Guy looked like a lot of people. The video quality was poor enough that he could match hundreds, maybe thousands of men in Indiana alone. The clothing was generic, the body type was average, the gait was normal. And the audio? Guys down the hill in a gravelly male voice? That could be almost anyone. Police knew they needed more. They needed a break in the case, something that would point them to a specific individual. They had DNA from the crime scene. They had video and audio. They had a general physical description, but they didn't have a name. And without a name, they couldn't get justice for Abby and Libby. On July 17, 2017, 5 months after the murders, Indiana State Police released a composite sketch of the suspect. It showed a white male with a prominent nose, possibly in his 40s or 50s, with a goatee or facial hair. The sketch was based on descriptions from witnesses who had been on the trail that day and had seen someone matching Bridge Guy's description. The community reacted immediately. Tips flooded in. That looks like my neighbor. That's my co-worker. I know that face. Hundreds of men were reported to police based on resemblance to the sketch. Investigators followed up on every credible lead. But here's where things got complicated. On April 22, 2019, more than 2 years after the murders, police held another press conference. Superintendent Doug Carter stood at the podium with stunning news. They were releasing a new sketch. A completely different sketch. This second sketch showed a much younger man, possibly in his 20s or early 30s. Clean-shaven or with minimal facial hair. Different facial structure, different nose, different everything. Carter explained that this new sketch was based on additional witness testimony and was now considered the primary representation of the suspect. The old sketch, he said, should be considered secondary. This created massive confusion. Were they looking for 2 different people? Had the investigation shifted to a new suspect? Why release a sketch in 2017 only to contradict it entirely in 2019? The true crime community erupted with theories. Some people believed police had it wrong with the first sketch and finally corrected course. Others thought the second sketch was a distraction, that the first one was accurate and police were just trying a new angle. Some believed there were 2 suspects involved, explaining why 2 very different sketches existed. The confusion was understandable. How do you go from looking for a middle-aged man with a goatee to a young man in his 20s? Those are drastically different suspect profiles. Police tried to clarify. The second sketch, they said, was actually based on earlier witness descriptions that they now believed were more accurate. They'd prioritized the wrong information in 2017 and were correcting that mistake in 2019. But the damage was done. Public confidence in the investigation was shaken. If police couldn't even agree on what the suspect looked like, how were they going to catch him? Meanwhile, the investigation continued on multiple fronts. Police weren't just relying on sketches and public tips. They were building a timeline of everyone who'd been on or near the trail system on February 13, 2017. They were interviewing hundreds of people. They were reviewing hours of surveillance footage from businesses in the area. They were tracking down every car that had been seen near the trail entrance. One piece of evidence they focused on was a vehicle. Witnesses had reported seeing a car parked at an old CPS building near the trail entrance between noon and 5 p.m. on February 13th. The car was described as possibly a 1965 to 1977 Ford Bronco, but witnesses weren't certain. It was a lead, but without more specific information, it was hard to track. Police also revealed that they were looking at a specific time frame. They believed Bridge Guy had arrived at the trail between 12 dawn and 1:30 p.m. He'd encountered the girls around 2:13 p.m. He'd left the area by early evening, possibly walking back to the parking area, possibly leaving via the cemetery that's accessible from the far side of the bridge. They asked anyone who'd been on the trail that day to come forward, even if they didn't think they'd seen anything important. Maybe you passed someone. Maybe you saw a car. Maybe you noticed something that seemed insignificant at the time but could be crucial now. Some people did come forward. They described seeing a man matching Bridge Guy's description. One witness said they'd seen him walking with purpose, like he had somewhere to be. Another said he'd looked out of place, not dressed like a typical hiker. These descriptions helped refine the timeline, but they didn't identify him. Years passed. The case grew cold in the public eye, though police insisted they were still working it actively. The second anniversary came and went. Then the third. Then the fourth. The fifth. Abby's family and Libby's family held annual vigils. They gave interviews pleading for information. They kept their daughter's memories alive through social media, through scholarships, through community events. They never gave up hope that someone, somewhere, knew who Bridge Guy was and would eventually tell police. Libby's grandmother, Becky Patty, became a vocal advocate for the investigation. She spoke to media regularly, begging the public not to forget. "Someone knows who this is," she'd say. "Someone recognizes that voice. Someone has seen that video and knows exactly who that man is. Please come forward. Do it for Abby. Do it for Libby." In true crime communities online, the Delphi case became one of the most discussed unsolved murders in America. Reddit threads with thousands of comments, Facebook groups dedicated to analyzing every detail, YouTube channels breaking down the evidence frame by frame. Everyone had a theory. Everyone had a suspect they believed police should investigate. Some of the amateur sleuthing was helpful, some of it was harmful. Innocent people were accused online, their lives turned upside down by internet detectives convinced they'd solved the case. Police repeatedly warned the public against vigilante justice, against naming suspects without evidence, against harassing people based on speculation. But as years went by without an arrest, frustration grew. How could someone commit a double murder in broad daylight, be caught on video, have their voice recorded, and still not be identified? How was that possible in the age of digital forensics, facial recognition, and advanced investigative techniques? The answer, as it turned out, was simpler than anyone expected. Sometimes the most obvious place to hide is in plain sight. Richard Matthew Allen was born in 1972. By 2017, he was 45 years old, married, living in Delphi, Indiana. He worked at the local CVS pharmacy as a pharmacy technician. He'd held that job for years. He was polite to customers, reliable, quiet, the kind of person you'd interact with at the pharmacy counter and never think twice about. He lived on Whiteman Drive in Delphi, less than a 5-minute drive from the Monon High Bridge trail. His house was ordinary. His life seemed ordinary. He had no violent criminal history, no red flags in his background, no reason for anyone to suspect he was capable of murder. Richard Allen was the kind of man who blended in completely. Average height, average build, middle-aged, balding. If you passed him on the street, you wouldn't remember him 10 seconds later. He was invisible in the way that truly ordinary people are invisible, unremarkable in every way. And according to police, he was Bridge Guy. On October 26, 2022, more than 5.5 years after the murders of Abby Williams and Libby German, Indiana State Police arrested Richard Allen at his home in Delphi. He was charged with 2 counts of murder. The news shocked the community, shocked the nation, shocked everyone who'd followed this case for years. The man who killed Abby and Libby had been living in Delphi the entire time. He'd worked at the CVS where some of the families probably shopped. He'd lived in a neighborhood where people might have walked their dogs past his house. He'd been part of the community, present at vigils, seen at local events, right there, the whole time. How did police finally identify him? That story is almost as stunning as the arrest itself. In September 2022, a volunteer working on cold cases for the Carroll County Prosecutor's Office was reviewing old tips from the Delphi investigation. This volunteer wasn't a police officer, just a civilian helping process the backlog of thousands of tips that had never been fully followed up on. The volunteer found something that had been overlooked. A tip from February 2017, filed just days after the murders, in which a man had called the police tip line and said he'd been on the trail on February 13th. The man had given his name, Richard Allen. He said he'd been walking the trail that afternoon, had crossed the Monon High Bridge, had seen some girls on the bridge. He'd given his contact information and told police they could reach him if they needed more information. The tip had been filed, documented, but somehow it had never been properly followed up. It had fallen through the cracks in the chaos of 15,000 tips coming in simultaneously. The volunteer flagged this tip for investigators. In September 2022, more than 5 years later, investigators finally interviewed Richard Allen. During that interview, Allen admitted he'd been on the trail on February 13, 2017. He said he'd arrived around 1:30 p.m. He'd walked the trail, crossed the Monon High Bridge, watched some fish in the creek, then left around 3:30 p.m. He said he was wearing blue jeans and a blue or black jacket that day. He said he didn't see anything unusual, didn't see anyone who stood out. But here's what investigators noticed. The timeline Allen described put him on the Monon High Bridge at approximately the same time Abby and Libby were there. The clothing he described matched Bridge Guy's clothing. The physical description matched. Middle-aged white male, average build. And when investigators compared Richard Allen's voice to the Guys Down the Hill audio, they believed they had a match. They obtained a search warrant for Allen's home. On October 13, 2022, they executed that warrant. They seized electronics, clothing, possible weapons. They collected DNA samples from Allen for comparison to the DNA found at the crime scene, and they found something else. A gun. A .40 caliber Sig Sauer pistol. Forensic analysts compared a spent cartridge found at the crime scene to test fires from Allen's gun. The conclusion: the cartridge found near the bodies had been cycled through Allen's Sig Sauer. It hadn't been fired, but it had been chambered and ejected, leaving microscopic marks that matched Allen's gun. This was the physical evidence that connected Richard Allen to the crime scene. Combined with his own admission that he'd been on the trail that day, wearing clothing matching Bridge Guy, at the time of the murders, police had enough to make an arrest. On October 26, 2022, Richard Allen was taken into custody. On October 28th, he was formally charged with 2 counts of murder in the deaths of Abigail Williams and Libby German. The arrest made national news. After 5.5 years, police had finally charged someone. The man in the video, Bridge Guy, the voice saying "Guys down the hill," had been identified. But the arrest raised as many questions as it answered. If police had a tip from Richard Allen in February 2017 admitting he was on the trail that day, why did it take until 2022 to follow up? If his clothing matched, his timeline matched, his physical description matched, why wasn't he investigated immediately? The answer seems to be a combination of overwhelming tip volume, investigative overload, and human error. With 15,000 tips in the first month alone, with limited resources, with tips coming from all over the country, a single tip from a local man admitting he was on the trail got lost in the shuffle. For more than 5 years, Richard Allen lived freely in Delphi. He went to work. He came home. He lived a normal life. While families grieved, while the community mourned, while the nation wondered who could have done this, Richard Allen was there, right there in Delphi, walking the same streets as the families of the girls he allegedly killed. The realization was devastating. The killer hadn't fled to another state. He hadn't gone into hiding. He'd stayed in Delphi, hidden not by clever planning but by sheer ordinariness. So what evidence does the state have against Richard Allen? Let's break down exactly what connects him to the murders of Abby Williams and Libby German. First, his own admission. Richard Allen told police he was on the Monon High Bridge trail on February 13, 2017, between approximately 1:30 and 3:30 p.m. This places him at the location during the exact time frame when the girls were abducted and killed. That's not circumstantial. That's his own statement. Second, the clothing. Allen told police he was wearing blue jeans and a blue or black jacket that day. This matches the clothing visible in the video Libby recorded of Bridge Guy. Blue jeans, dark jacket. If Allen wasn't Bridge Guy, it would be an extraordinary coincidence that he was on the same bridge, at the same time, wearing the same clothing as the killer. Third, the timeline. Witnesses placed a man matching Bridge Guy's description on the trail between 1:30 and 3:30 p.m. Allen's own timeline matches this exactly. He says he arrived at 1:30, left at 3:30. The murders occurred within that window. Fourth, physical appearance. Richard Allen is a white male, approximately 5'5" to 5'6", tall, stocky build, balding. This matches the general description of Bridge Guy from the video and from witness accounts. While the video quality makes definitive identification impossible, Allen fits the profile. Fifth, the voice. Investigators who interviewed Allen in 2022 believed his voice matched the "Guys Down the Hill" audio recorded by Libby. Voice analysis is not an exact science, but according to the probable cause affidavit, multiple investigators independently noted similarities between Allen's voice and the Bridge Guy audio. Sixth, the ballistics evidence. This is the big one. A .40 caliber unspent cartridge was found at the crime scene near where the girls' bodies were discovered. Forensic analysis determined this cartridge had been cycled through a firearm, but not fired. When police searched Allen's home in October 2022, they seized a .40 caliber Sig Sauer pistol. Forensic firearms examiners compared the crime scene cartridge to test fires from Allen's gun. Their conclusion: the cartridge found at the scene had been cycled through Allen's Sig Sauer. The microscopic marks on the cartridge matched marks created by the ejection mechanism in Allen's specific gun. This is powerful physical evidence. It places Allen's gun at the crime scene. The defense will likely challenge the reliability of this analysis, but if it holds up, it's the kind of evidence that wins murder convictions. Seventh, the car. Remember the vehicle witnesses reported seeing near the trail entrance on February 13, 2017? The car described as possibly a 1965 to 1977 Ford Bronco? Police later determined this description may have been inaccurate. What if it wasn't a Bronco, but a different vehicle that witnesses misidentified? Richard Allen drove a 2016 Ford Focus. It's a completely different type of vehicle, but if witnesses only got a partial look, or saw it from a distance, or were mistaken about details, it's possible Allen's car was the one reported near the trail that day. Eighth, lack of alibi. Allen told police he was alone on the trail that day. He didn't have anyone who could confirm his whereabouts or verify his timeline. This isn't evidence of guilt, but it means there's nothing exonerating him either. Ninth, opportunity. Allen lived 5 minutes from the trail. He was familiar with the area. He knew the bridge, knew the woods, knew how to access that area and how to leave it. This is local knowledge, the kind of familiarity that would make someone confident moving through that terrain quickly. That's what the prosecution has. It's circumstantial in some places, but it's strong. Place, time, clothing, appearance, voice, physical evidence connecting his gun to the scene. That's a compelling case. But here's where it gets complicated. Because Richard Allen's defense team has mounted one of the most unusual defense strategies in recent true crime history. They claim he didn't do it. And more than that, they claim they know who did. Members of an Odin cult who committed ritualistic murders. In September 2023, Richard Allen's defense attorneys filed a memorandum that stunned everyone following the case. They argued that the murders of Abby Williams and Libby German were not committed by Richard Allen, but by members of a ritualistic cult devoted to Norse paganism and Odinism. The defense presented what they claimed was evidence of ritualistic elements at the crime scene. They said the positioning of the bodies, the arrangement of sticks and branches, and other details not publicly released suggested the murders were part of an Odin ritual sacrifice. Odinism is a modern pagan religion based on ancient Norse beliefs, centered around worship of gods like Odin, Thor, and Freya. The vast majority of Odin practitioners are peaceful people engaging in spiritual practice. But the defense claimed there's a darker fringe element, white supremacist groups that have co-opted Norse symbolism and engaged in violent rituals. The defense named specific individuals they claimed were involved. Local men with alleged ties to Odinism, men who supposedly had knowledge of the crime scene details, who had access to the area, who had made incriminating statements. The defense claimed these men were the real killers and that Richard Allen was being wrongfully prosecuted. This theory created a firestorm. The men named by the defense denied any involvement. Police said they'd investigated these individuals and cleared them. Legal experts questioned whether the defense was presenting credible evidence or simply creating reasonable doubt through sensational claims. Judge Frances Gull, presiding over the case, reviewed the Odinism evidence and ruled that it was not admissible at trial. She found that the defense had not provided sufficient evidence connecting these alternative suspects to the crime. Naming people without credible proof, she ruled, was prejudicial and inappropriate. But the defense wasn't done. They filed motion after motion, arguing that evidence of ritualistic elements at the crime scene was relevant, that Allen's constitutional rights were being violated by excluding this evidence, that the jury deserved to hear all possible theories about who killed Abby and Libby. The legal battles over the Odinism defense have delayed the trial repeatedly. What was supposed to be a straightforward murder prosecution has become a complex battle over what evidence can be presented, what theories can be argued, and whether the defense is genuinely pursuing justice or simply muddying the waters. Prosecutors have been blunt in their response. They call the Odinism theory ridiculous, a desperate attempt to create doubt where none exists. They argue that the physical evidence against Allen is overwhelming, that his own statements place him at the scene, and that introducing cult theories distracts from the facts. Legal analysts are divided. Some say the defense is doing exactly what defense attorneys are supposed to do: vigorously represent their client and present alternative theories that could create reasonable doubt. Others say it's a cynical strategy, using sensational claims to confuse a jury when the evidence against the defendant is strong. Here's what makes the Odinism defense particularly controversial. It involves naming specific individuals as alternative suspects. These men have not been charged with any crime. They have not been arrested. Police say they've been investigated and cleared. But their names are now public, associated with one of the most notorious murders in recent history, simply because a defense team claimed they might be involved. This raises serious ethical questions. Can defense attorneys name innocent people as suspects just to create doubt about their own client's guilt? Where's the line between vigorous defense and defamation? The judge has tried to balance these concerns. She's allowed the defense to present general arguments about ritualistic elements, but she's restricted them from naming specific alternative suspects without sufficient evidence. The defense has appealed these rulings, claiming Allen's right to a fair trial is being violated. Meanwhile, Richard Allen has been in custody since October 2022. He's been held in isolation at the Indiana Department of Correction, away from the local jail, due to concerns about his safety and the high-profile nature of the case. His attorneys have argued that these conditions constitute cruel and unusual punishment, that Allen's mental health is deteriorating, that he's being treated like a convicted murderer before he's even been tried. The prosecution argues that Allen is being housed appropriately, given the severity of the charges and the security concerns. They say his defense team is trying to create sympathy for a man accused of murdering 2 children. All of this has played out in public. Court filings, motions, rulings, appeals. The Delphi case has become as much a legal drama as a murder investigation. And through it all, the families of Abby Williams and Libby German have waited for justice. More than 7 years since February 13, 2017. More than 7 years since 2 best friends went for a hike and never came home. More than 7 years since Libby German recorded 43 seconds of video that should have led immediately to an arrest, but instead took 5 years to result in charges. The trial is finally scheduled for 2026. It will be one of the most watched trials in recent memory. The evidence will be presented. The Odinism theory will be argued, to whatever extent the judge allows. A jury will decide whether Richard Allen is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And the nation will be watching, just as they've been watching since February 2017, waiting for answers to the question that's haunted this case from the beginning. Who is Bridge Guy? In November 2023, more than a year after Richard Allen's arrest, prosecutors revealed something that significantly strengthened their case. Allen had confessed to the murders, multiple times. According to court documents, Allen confessed to killing Abby Williams and Libby German on at least 5 separate occasions while in custody. He confessed to his wife during a phone call. He confessed to his mother during a visit. He confessed to a prison psychologist. He confessed to correctional staff. He confessed in detail about what he did, how he did it, and why he did it. These weren't vague statements. They were specific confessions that included details only the killer would know. The defense immediately challenged the validity of these confessions. They argued that Allen was in a state of serious mental health crisis when he made these statements. They said he'd been in solitary confinement for over a year, that he was showing signs of psychosis, that he was on heavy medication, that he was not in a sound state of mind. They presented evidence that Allen had engaged in bizarre behavior in custody, eating his own feces, banging his head against walls, making nonsensical statements. They argued this was proof of a mental break, not proof of guilt, and that any confessions made during this period should be considered the product of a disturbed mind, not reliable admissions. The The prosecution countered that Allen was faking mental illness to create grounds for an insanity defense. They pointed out that he'd confessed multiple times to multiple people in varying levels of detail. They argued that someone in genuine psychosis wouldn't be able to maintain consistent facts across multiple confessions. They also revealed that Allen had apologized during some of these confessions. He'd expressed remorse. He'd said he was sorry for what he did. This, prosecutors argued, was not the behavior of someone in psychosis. This was the behavior of someone who knew exactly what he'd done and was experiencing guilt. One of Allen's confessions was particularly damning. According to prosecutors, he told investigators details about the crime scene that had never been made public, specific positioning of the bodies, specific actions he took, information that only the killer would possess. If true, this eliminates the possibility that Allen simply confessed based on publicly available information. This would be confession backed by intimate knowledge of the crime. The defense filed motions to suppress the confessions, arguing they should not be admissible at trial. They claimed Allen's constitutional rights had been violated by the conditions of his confinement, that holding him in solitary at a state prison instead of the local jail was designed to break him psychologically, that any statements he made were coerced not through direct interrogation, but through psychological torture. Judge Gull has not yet ruled definitively on whether the confessions will be admitted at trial. This will likely be one of the most contested issues during the proceedings. If the confessions come in, they're devastating to the defense. If they're excluded, the prosecution loses some of its most powerful evidence. Legal experts note that confessions made to family members during phone calls and visits are generally admissible, even if the defendant's mental state was compromised. The question is whether the conditions of Allen's confinement were so extreme that any statements he made should be considered involuntary. There's another element to consider. Why would someone confess to murders they didn't commit? The defense argues it happens more often than people think, especially when someone is in psychological distress. They point to cases where innocent people confess to crimes under pressure, only to be exonerated later by DNA or other evidence. But prosecutors argue this is different. Allen wasn't being interrogated when he confessed. He wasn't being pressured by police. He was talking to his wife, his mother, prison staff. He volunteered these statements. That suggests they're genuine, not coerced. The confession evidence has shifted public opinion about the case. When Allen was first arrested, there was skepticism. The case against him seemed largely circumstantial. The Odinism defense created doubt. But the revelations about confessions made many people reassess. If he confessed repeatedly to multiple people, including family members, doesn't that suggest guilt? The defense maintains that Allen is innocent, that the confessions are false, that the real killers are still out there. They say the prosecution is rushing to judgment based on a mentally ill man's statements, ignoring evidence that points to alternative suspects. The prosecution maintains that Allen is guilty, that the evidence is overwhelming, that he killed Abby and Libby and is now trying to escape justice through legal maneuvering and false claims of mental illness. The truth will ultimately be decided by a jury. But the confession evidence, combined with the ballistics match, the timeline, the clothing, the voice comparison, all of it together creates a picture that's difficult for the defense to overcome, unless the Odinism theory gains traction, unless the jury believes the ritualistic elements at the crime scene point to someone other than Richard Allen, unless there's reasonable doubt. That's what trials are for. That's why we have juries, to weigh the evidence, listen to both sides, and make a determination about guilt or innocence based on facts, not speculation. After 7 years, the families of Abby Williams and Libby German will finally get their day in court, finally get to hear all the evidence, finally get answers to questions that have haunted them since February 13, 2017. There's something we need to talk about that often gets lost in discussions of evidence, defense strategies, and legal battles. Libby German's extraordinary courage. Think about what she did. A 14-year-old girl, confronted by a man on a bridge, sensing danger, made the split-second decision to start recording video. Not to run, not to scream, not to freeze in panic. She hit record. She captured his face as much as the camera could see. She captured his voice. She captured evidence that would eventually lead to an arrest. In her final moments, knowing something terrible was about to happen, Libby German tried to solve her own murder. That takes a level of clarity, bravery, and presence of mind that most adults wouldn't possess in a moment of terror. She was 14 years old, and she became a hero. Her grandmother, Becky Patty, has spoken about this many times. She didn't give up, Becky said in one interview. She fought to the end. She tried to help us. She tried to make sure we'd know who did this. The impact of what Libby did extends beyond just this case. Law enforcement agencies across the country now teach about the Delphi case in training sessions. They emphasize the importance of digital evidence. They encourage young people to trust their instincts and to document suspicious situations when safe to do so. Libby's video and audio became the centerpiece of the largest murder investigation in Indiana history. That 43 seconds of footage was analyzed by the FBI, by state police, by forensic specialists. It was viewed millions of times by the public. It became the most recognizable piece of evidence in modern true crime. Without that video, without that audio, would police have ever identified Richard Allen? It's impossible to say. They might have. DNA and ballistics evidence could have eventually led them to him. But the video provided the initial break, the first real lead, the foundation of the entire investigation. Abby Williams was equally brave that day. She was with her best friend. They faced this danger together. While we know Libby recorded the video, we don't know what Abby was doing in those moments. We know she stayed with Libby. We know they went through this together. We know their friendship lasted until the very end. The families of both girls have worked tirelessly to keep their memories alive. They've established scholarships. They've organized annual memorial events. They've advocated for trail safety, for awareness about stranger danger, for teaching young people to trust their instincts. The Abby and Libby Memorial Park was established in Delphi. It includes a softball field because both girls loved softball. It's become a place where the community gathers to remember them, to honor them, to make sure they're never forgotten. Every February 13, on the anniversary of their deaths, hundreds of people gather in Delphi for a vigil. They light candles. They share memories. They stand in solidarity with the families. Even strangers from across the country make pilgrimages to Delphi on that day, feeling connected to this case, wanting to pay their respects. The impact on Delphi has been profound. This small town of 3,000 people became the center of a national news story. For years, their community was defined by this tragedy. Reporters descended on the town. True crime enthusiasts visited the trail. The Monon High Bridge became a grim tourist destination, with people wanting to see where it happened, to walk where Abby and Libby walked. The trail has since been closed to the public at certain times. The house at 1122 King Road, near where the bodies were found, was demolished. The community wanted to move forward, but they also wanted to remember. It's a delicate balance. For Libby's family, the waiting has been agonizing. 7 years of not knowing if there would ever be justice, 5 years before an arrest, then more years of legal delays, motions, appeals. The trial keeps getting pushed back. The Odinism defense has extended the process. Every delay is another wound for the families. Becky Patty has said she wants to be in the courtroom for every moment of the trial. She wants to hear every piece of evidence. She wants to look Richard Allen in the eye. She wants justice for her granddaughter. Mike and Becky Patty have also spoken about Libby's phone. That phone that captured the video, that recorded the audio, that became the key piece of evidence. They see it as Libby's final gift to them, her last act of love, making sure that whoever did this wouldn't get away with it. The prosecution has said they'll be seeking a significant sentence if Allen is convicted. Given that he's charged with 2 counts of murder of children under 14, the penalties are severe. Life in prison without parole is likely. But for the families, it's not about revenge. It's about justice. It's about knowing that the person responsible is held accountable. It's about being able to go to Abby and Libby's graves and say, "We got him. He's been caught. He's been convicted. You can rest now. That day is coming." After 7 years, after countless delays, after legal battles and defense strategies and motions and appeals, the trial is finally approaching. And when it happens, the nation will be watching to see if justice is served for 2 teenage girls who went for a hike on a February afternoon and never came home. Watching to see if the 43 seconds of video that Libby German recorded in her final moments will be enough to convict the man who took her life. The trial of Richard Allen is scheduled for 2026. The exact date hasn't been finalized due to ongoing legal motions, but it will likely be one of the most watched criminal trials of the year. The trial has been moved from Carroll County, where Delphi is located, to Allen County. This is due to extensive pretrial publicity. Finding an impartial jury in Carroll County would be nearly impossible. Everyone in Delphi knows this case intimately. Everyone has an opinion. Moving the trial to another county gives both sides a better chance at a fair proceeding. The prosecution will be led by the Indiana Attorney General's office, along with local prosecutors. They'll be presenting what they describe as overwhelming evidence of Allen's guilt. Here's what we can expect them to present: the video and audio evidence. The jury will see the bridge guy video. They'll hear the guys down the hill audio. They'll hear expert testimony about voice analysis, about the timeline of when this was recorded, about what it shows. Richard Allen's own statements. The fact that he admitted being on the trail that day, at that time, wearing clothing matching bridge guy. This is Allen's own timeline, placing him at the scene. The ballistics evidence. Forensic firearms examiners will testify about the unspent cartridge found at the crime scene and how it matches Allen's Sig Sauer pistol. This is technical evidence, but it's powerful. It physically connects Allen's gun to the location where the girls were killed, the confessions. If Judge Gull rules they're admissible, the jury will hear about Allen confessing to his wife, his mother, prison staff, and psychologists. They'll hear recordings of phone calls if available. They'll hear testimony from people who heard him confess. This could be the most damning evidence in the entire case. Timeline evidence. Witnesses who saw someone matching bridge guy's description on the trail that day. Cell phone data. Vehicle sightings. All the circumstantial evidence that places Allen at the scene during the window when the murders occurred. Crime scene evidence. Photos. Forensic analysis. Testimony from investigators who processed the scene. The jury will see exactly what was found, how it connects to Allen, and why police believe he's responsible. The prosecution's case will be straightforward. Richard Allen was on the trail that day. He's the man in the video. He's the voice in the audio. His gun was at the crime scene. He confessed. He's guilty. The defense will present a very different narrative. They'll argue that Richard Allen is an innocent man being railroaded by an investigation desperate to close a high-profile case. Here's what we can expect from the defense. Challenges to the ballistics evidence. Defense experts will likely testify that ballistics matching is not an exact science, that the connection between the crime scene cartridge and Allen's gun is not as definitive as prosecutors claim. They'll argue that without a fired bullet, matching a cartridge to a specific gun is unreliable. Challenges to the confessions. The defense will present evidence of Allen's mental health crisis while in custody. They'll argue he was in psychosis, that he was on heavy medication, that he was not competent to make reliable statements. They'll call mental health experts to testify that false confessions are possible, especially from people in psychological distress. The Odinism alternative theory. To whatever extent Judge Gull allows, the defense will argue that ritualistic elements at the crime scene point to someone other than Richard Allen. They'll try to introduce doubt about whether Allen could have committed these crimes alone or whether he committed them at all. Challenges to the identification. The defense will argue that the video quality is too poor to definitively identify anyone. That bridge guy could be one of hundreds of men in Indiana. That voice analysis is not reliable science. That placing Allen on the trail that day doesn't prove he encountered Abby and Libby, let alone killed them. Timeline inconsistencies. The defense will look for any gaps in the prosecution's timeline, any moments that can't be accounted for, any possibility that someone else was on that trail and committed these murders. The defense's strategy will likely focus on reasonable doubt. They don't have to prove Allen is innocent. They just have to make the jury question whether the prosecution has proven guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. This is a circumstantial case in many ways. There's no video of the actual murders. No eyewitness who saw Allen kill anyone. No DNA match that definitively places him at the crime scene during the act. The prosecution's case is built on accumulation of evidence. He was there. He matches the description. His gun was there. He confessed. Each piece alone might not be enough, but together, they create a compelling picture. The question is whether the jury will see it that way. Will they believe the confessions are genuine or the product of mental illness? Will they accept the ballistics evidence as reliable or view it as junk science? Will they dismiss the Odinism theory as desperate distraction or wonder if there's something to it? One thing is certain, this trial will be emotional. The families will be there. Crime scene photos will be shown. The video and audio of Bridge Guy will be played. The reality of what happened to Abby and Libby will be laid bare in graphic detail. The jury will have to see all of it, process all of it, make sense of evidence that's sometimes contradictory, sometimes confusing, sometimes overwhelmingly sad. If Richard Allen is convicted, he'll likely spend the rest of his life in prison. He's in his early 50s now. A life sentence means he'll die in custody. If he's acquitted, he walks free. The investigation would theoretically reopen. Police would have to look at other suspects. The Odinism theory would gain credibility, and the families of Abby and Libby would be devastated. That's the stakes. That's what this trial means. After 7 years of waiting, Everything will be decided by 12 people who didn't know Abby Williams or Libby German, who've never been to Delphi, who will be asked to render a verdict that will define justice for two murdered teenage girls. On February 13, 2017, two best friends went for a hike. They were laughing, taking photos, enjoying a day off from school. They crossed an old railroad bridge, capturing a Snapchat photo that would be Libby German's last social media post. 17 minutes later, they encountered evil. A man on that bridge. A voice saying, "Guys down the hill." 43 seconds of video that 14-year-old Libby was brave enough to record, even as she must have known something terrible was about to happen. By sunset, they were missing. By the next afternoon, they were dead. For 5 years, their killer walked free. He lived in Delphi, worked at a local CVS, blended into the community so completely that no one suspected him. He'd even called the police tip line in those early days, admitting he'd been on the trail, providing his name and contact information. A tip that fell through the cracks in the chaos of thousands of leads. It took a volunteer reviewing old tips in 2022 to finally connect the dots. It took investigators re-interviewing Richard Allen and realizing that this ordinary, unremarkable man matched every piece of evidence they had. The timeline, the clothing, the voice, and most damningly, his gun at the crime scene. Richard Allen has been charged with 2 counts of murder. He's confessed, according to prosecutors, multiple times. He's awaiting trial in 2026. If convicted, he'll spend the rest of his life in prison. But this case is about more than just Richard Allen. It's about Abby Williams and Libby German, 2 teenage girls whose lives were stolen from them. 2 friends who deserved to grow up, graduate high school, go to college, fall in love, have careers, have families. They deserve to live. It's about a small town that lost its innocence. Delphi, Indiana, where people used to leave their doors unlocked, where parents didn't worry about their kids hiking local trails. That sense of safety was shattered on February 13, 2017. And it's about the power of courage in the face of evil. Libby German, in her final moments, thinking clearly enough to hit record, to capture evidence, to try to help solve her own murder. That kind of bravery deserves to be remembered forever. The trial is coming. After 7 years of waiting, the families of Abby and Libby will finally have their day in court. They'll finally hear all the evidence. They'll finally see justice move forward, and the nation will be watching to see if the 43 seconds of video that haunted America for half a decade will be enough to convict the man who took 2 innocent lives. Libby German gave us everything we needed to find her killer. Now it's up to the justice system to make sure her courage wasn't in vain. If this case affected you the way it's affected millions of others, make sure to subscribe to Forensic Disconnect. We'll be covering the Richard Allen trial when it begins in 2026, breaking down the evidence, the testimony, and the legal strategies as they unfold. Hit that like button if you found this investigation thorough and respectful. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. Do you think Richard Allen is guilty? Do you believe the Odinism defense has merit? What do you think the trial will reveal? And most importantly, remember Abby Williams and Libby German. They weren't just a true crime case. They were real girls with real lives, real families, real futures that were stolen from them. Justice for Abby, justice for Libby. They will never be forgotten. This has been Forensic Disconnect. Thank you for watching.